Welcome everybody on this, our episode number 2 of Coffee with Creatives under the Sunderland Sound YouTube video channel. We have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Stephen Peter Rodgers, singer-songwriter extraordinaire from the New Haven, Connecticut area. Steve is also a longtime friend and fellow musician with whom I've had the wonderful experience of sharing stages with many times over the years. Catching up with Steve on this, the release and subsequent tour for his album, Speck on a Clover, is something that I've been anxiously awaiting. Steve has been a pillar of the Connecticut music scene through the profound impact of Mighty Purple in the 90s and the 2000s, and has continued to evolve himself and contribute to the scene with projects, albums, running one of the most notable clubs in Connecticut, and reinventing himself with his new, as I would define it, magnum opus, Speck on a Clover. So Steve, welcome. How's it going?
Stoked to be here.
Cool. Yeah, so there's so many things I want to catch up on and so many questions I want to ask you. Going back to the journey of our days of playing shows together right around the tail end of Mighty Purple's Black River Falls era to the release of this incredibly poignant, and I see it as effective and powerful new album. I can see and really feel the joy just from the pictures of the release of the New Haven show. Tell me a little bit about that and the path to what got you to creating this record.
Well, I started writing songs for this album right around the time the pandemic started. Actually, about a month before the pandemic started, I had wrapped up a tour that I did as a visual artist, creating miniatures for a multi-city Christmas festival called Enchanted Christmas. And that was an all-in experience for about 6 months of creating miniature train sets and miniature sets that would end up in Seattle and in Florida and at Nationals Ballpark in Washington, D.C. So that was a super crazy experience for 6 months where I almost didn't even have time to touch my guitar or anything. At that point, I didn't even have a music room. I just had a workshop where I was building miniatures. And I had always had a music room when I owned the Space Clubs. And when those came to their ends in 2018, I sort of took a step back from doing music and really did a lot of just self-discovery, self-reinvention. And in that process, I started building natural material fairy houses and started really immersing myself in my art. And then I started playing guitar and piano again and started writing songs. And I released an album in 2019 called Count It All Joy, which was recorded live with me and my brother Johnny and Seth Adam and Ben Dean, who's an incredible fiddle player as well, and Ricky Harkey, who is an incredible singer from Boulder, Colorado. And we kind of recorded that album in 2 days. We did most of it live. I released it in 2019, started going out and doing a whole bunch of shows to support it around the Northeast. Then all of a sudden I got offered this crazy opportunity to build miniatures for this multi-city Christmas festival. So I sort of put all my touring and everything aside just because it was an incredible opportunity to showcase the other things that I do, which is art. And at the end of that 6-month run of doing that whole art tour and everything, I came home and said, you know what, I need to build a music room. I had a music room at the Space forever and ever and just never had one at my house. So I cleared out the storage room in my basement, which is adjacent to my miniatures room, and started filling it with all kinds of stuff that I found mostly on Craigslist and Marketplace. I started restoring keyboards. I had a part-time job working as an apprentice under Fred DeLeon, who's one of the higher ups at Vintage Vibe, which is a company that builds really beautiful aftermarket keyboards and restores Rhodes and vintage Wurlitzers. So I learned how to restore those things.
Very cool. Yeah.
Finding my own and restoring them. So I have that sort of stuff.
Oh, gorgeous.
Yeah. And I restored all those things, which is wonderful. And I just started writing songs like I never, well, not never, but I hadn't written songs the way I started writing songs for this album since Mighty Purple's Bohica and Black River Falls back in the 90s. Primarily because I never had time to do it when I was running the clubs. I was working 70 hours plus a week. And I almost lost my whole sense of my own creativity in doing that, and sort of became the guy behind the desk drinking coffee and booking shows all day and as wonderful as that 15-year period of my life was, and I wouldn't do a whole lot to change it, I did lose a lot of my creative self and spirit in that time. So getting back to writing songs in early 2020, this is pre-pandemic, I'd never had a recording setup. I had an old Mac Mini from the mid 2000s that could barely run GarageBand at the time. I always had producer friends and a producer through all the Mighty Purple years with studios. So this was the first time I'd ever started experimenting with pushing buttons. And honestly, when I first started recording in my little storage room that I had cleared out, what I was coming up with was less than subpar.
It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. I just got into it in the last 2 years or so. And I mean, just signal theory alone, you realize it's a whole different thing, at least as a drummer, right? It's a whole different thing than what I thought it was. Yeah.
I'll wait to tell drummer jokes until later.
Yeah, I opened the door for you there. Totally.
Right, I'll tell one really quick, which is what are the drummer's last words in a band?
Oh goodness, what is that?
Hey guys, can we try one of my songs? Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's a thing. That is a totally legit joke. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I started really diving in deep, started reading a lot, watching a lot of YouTube videos, and consulting a lot of my friends, including my brother, who's been recording very seriously for more than 10 years now and has quite a career in film as well as his own music. So he helped and walked me through kind of, getting the right setup and everything. And I had a couple of other friends who were here in Connecticut with me and hands-on. And this is pre-pandemic. I'd had the first 2 or 3 songs written right before the pandemic hit, and was sort of bringing them around to some of my other producer friends. Hey guys, what do you think? You know what I mean? I was like an eager little middle school student or something.
Right.
And they were like, it's okay, Steve, but it sounds really thin. I didn't have any real monitors. I had some speakers that I had found in the trash at one point or something. So over the course of the first year of the pandemic, I really started building up my equipment list. I sold a bunch of model trains and stuff I didn't need anymore, financed the studio. And through that first year, I discovered a whole process I'd never known before. And it ended up leading me down some new paths and discovering even things about myself that I didn't know. The pandemic, like for most of us, was a very lonely time for me, although I do have a wonderful family who were right upstairs, but I did end up isolating a whole lot, and I would often be up until 2, 3, 4 in the morning recording and trying things. And instead of getting wicked depressed and super isolated, I gave myself a challenge to write and record 1 song a week through the pandemic. I ended up with about 40 songs in a year, but my challenge was write and record 1 song a week, no matter what it is. And there's some that will never see the light of day, but it was a good exercise for me. And then towards the middle of the pandemic, I was approached by a few folks who had heard the music that I was making, and they really liked it a lot. They're sort of like up and coming, developing acoustic artists in Connecticut. And they approached me about recording them. So I started recording them and honing my skills more and more. The first couple of records have come out now of people that I've produced, which is pretty wild. I have so much studio time experience since I was 17 years old, but this is the first time I ever pushed buttons. And it really gave me the freedom to create, where you hit the button on that clock.
You watch the dollars burn.
Yeah, so I was easily putting in 30 plus hours, 40 hours a week into recording my own stuff for the first 6 months of the pandemic. And that really helped me hone my skills, along with reading the Bible. Mixing secrets. I nerded out on all that stuff, as well as seeking advice from some friends and producer friends and things like that. And I was really lucky. I get to a certain point with songs and not know what the heck to do with them. And so my brother ended up taking one and the title track off the album, Speck on a Clover, and running with. I just kind of gave him carte blanche to do whatever the heck he wanted, and I think that song came out fantastic. Nate Krisky was another one who I gave a song to, because I was kind of lost in there, and he killed it, did a great job. And Tim Walsh, who was in a band called the Step Kids, he also produced 1 song. And then I ended up working with a guy named Sam Carlson, who has a studio called Sans Serif in New Haven. He's in a band called The Tyne.
Okay.
Yeah. and he ended up doing a lot of mixing, and in the process teaching me a whole bunch of stuff, and that was an invaluable experience to me. While the album was self-produced and I was involved in almost every minute of it, with the exception of maybe my brother's mixing and Nate's mixing, just because of distance proximity. It was a huge learning experience for me, and here I am. Here
Yeah.
I am, looking at the other 40 songs that did not end up making it on the record, going, well, I have a whole nother record worth of stuff.
Stockpile. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Our stories parallel a little bit when the pandemic hit. So my day gig, I'm an analyst, so I'm able to work from home a couple days a week. But with the pandemic, it was every single day. So
Sure.
I did the exact same thing, and just started saying, like, what is the thing that I can do now that I'm because I was in the middle of the learning curve too, right? I just got it. Don't want to do the gear wormhole, but I just got the Behringer X32 and just learning about signal theory, and then using a router to send out monitors and all that kind of stuff. And like, how do you get the best performance out of your players and all those kinds of things? And it's really interesting because at least the way I see it is, same thing. The studios that I've been in, it's always been, all right, you really work your parts out. You're really ready to go. You know exactly how you want it to go because of the cost that's associated with it. But there's a bit of a wall between what you're doing and then the mixing, the mastering, and the overall production, because they have to have their own sort of strategy as well. Now that I'm seeing both sides, and I'm also on the uber amateur audio engineering and mixing side, I'm realizing, yes, there's this sort of strategy theory and there's the learnings behind it, but there's also room to be creative, and there's also room to try things out. And you start to hear it. And certainly as a drummer, it's affected me. I hear drum sounds different now, and therefore I play differently. It's not like I don't play like a completely different drummer, but I approach things different. And it certainly has affect on how I perceive music now. And that's one of the things, Steve, that I've always appreciated about you, is you've always just been direct and like pursued. If there's something that you wanted to do, you pursued it, and you didn't let things get in the way. You set goals for yourself. Like Mighty Purple was always like, we're going to do this. You as a solo album, it's like, this is my goal. This is where I'm going to be. And, I've always valued that about you.
Thank you.
You've always had this commitment to being you, right? And like never changing for the sake of the industry, the scene. And one that I really dig is What I Am, because it's just brutal, it's blunt, but it's beautiful too, right? And you call out like who you are. You're a dad, you're a leader of the band. And like what we just talked about, you're somebody who's learning and has now logged all of these hours and like, mixing and recording and those kinds of things. But you also have zero concern about calling out, hey, I don't care about money. I don't care about the hipster hierarchy, right? And there's those out there who are going to throw you to the wolves, and oh well. Like we were just talking about, it seems like you've really come into this deep sort of self-introspection post-pandemic. Can you tell me a little bit more about that self-introspection? Because it seems like you're doing all these wonderful things. Like, I read about like you going out to Honduras and doing community work and all of these different things. What's bringing you to that like really deep self-introspection?
Well, I think when I opened the space in 2003, I was still a guy in my 20s. I sort of still hadn't fully explored my musical self, and I put all that on hold to really just run those places. And I really almost lost my self-identity at some points through that 15 years, just being caught up in what it took to run a business. I never signed up to do the space as a business. I signed up to do it as a community effort. I knew almost nothing about business other than what I had known from running a band. You know what I mean? Keeping cash in an envelope on the road.
Fighting with the agent at the end of the night.
Exactly. Being on the other side of it, being on the club owner end, it was a lot more business. Yeah, I guess at one point after the spaces, I just had time to breathe through several communities that I was involved with after the spaces. Well, I was really quiet for the first year after the spaces. It was a really hard transition, when you put your whole heart, soul on the line, sacrificed a lot of family and all of that for 15 years. All of a sudden you sort of go, okay, who the hell am I? With a big life change. one of the communities I had around me was the church I was involved with at the time. And through that church, I had the opportunity to go to Honduras. And their sort of standard missions trip mode was collect food and go and deliver it to villages and clothes and stuff like that. And I'd never been to Honduras. And we went to some really remote areas, like way out in the middle of nowhere on plantations, and just really beautiful country too, and rainforests and stuff. I decided, like, let's do more with this. So the first time I went, there was a little church and a whole bunch of teenagers who were really into playing guitar and drums and bass, all of their stuff. They literally had a bass that was made out of garbage wood, and their drum set was like worse than a CB700, like a piece of I don't even know what it was, some name I've never heard of.
It was a jerry rig.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't know how to do any, it sounded like crap and all that.
Yeah.
So on my first trip to Honduras, I ended up being like, okay, well, here I am. Why don't I teach these kids how to play guitar? Every day that I was there, more kids would show up and more kids would show up. And there were like 3 broken guitars there that I had to rig and tune down because there was one tuning head broken, all that sort of thing. So when I got the opportunity to visit after the second year, I had made all these like little buddies who were in touch with me on and all that stuff. I actually approached First Act Guitars and said, hey guys, I'm going down to the Children's Rescue Mission in Honduras, and they have all these broken guitars, and I'd love to be able to take a bunch of beginner guitars to them. And First Act agreed, and they shipped about 40 to Children's Rescue Mission in Honduras, which I went down and set up and got those all together. And then I also petitioned my local New Haven community and ended up taking about 15 guitars on our backs, and bass guitar, and went down there and completely revamped their drum set, got all of their PA gear set up and everything. And they had a teen church band that played during all the services, and they were pretty rough. The sort of not leader of the band, but the guy that I connected with most. He's a 20-year-old guy named Carlos, and he was just really an incredible kid. And we had a bit of a language barrier, and we had a translator as well. And I stay in touch with him to this day. We started getting the band together, and so we would spend 4 or 5 hours a day with the whole band. I was sort of band director, like, no, you don't play that there. You don't play that there. You know what I mean? You're going to get off the drum kit and play bass because you're a better bass player and you're a better drum, so I sort of coordinated this whole teen band. I spent years and years hanging out on the front porch of the space with teenagers, who are waiting to get into the shows or who were playing there.
Want to learn. Yeah.
I love the bright shine in a kid's eye who's played his first gig. The energy can fill up a stadium,
It's palpable. It really is. I mean, it hits you here. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I want to ask you a couple questions about some old school stuff and how it relates to new school stuff. And then we'll jump a little bit more into the specifics of the new record. One of the things that I really loved, and you guys were, as an up and coming, I think the first time we played together, I was probably 17 years old, 18 years old.
I probably too much older than that.
But my parents were like, oh, wait a minute, I can't give him a curfew. He's working in clubs at night. But one of the things that really was inspiring to me was the level of energy and just like in your face that Mighty Purple was in the 90s, and tunes like Keep My Head Above Water and Flying Solo, or even some like the more like super emotional, like No One Is God, like the down tempo stuff. It just was so energetic, regardless of which emotional channel it was going through. What is the influence on the music that you're doing now with Speck on a Clover from those days? Or what is the difference, and how does it not affect the music that you're playing? Like how does that relate?
I kind of feel, honestly, like I had a bit of a rebirth a couple of years ago when, just before the pandemic hit, and I started writing songs, which would eventually end up on this album. I wasn't writing songs going, I must write songs to go on an album.
Mm-hmm.
I just started writing songs because I had to get them out of my heart. And that is how I also wrote when I was a young guy, creating, the stuff on Black River Falls, Bohica, the sort of live records and all that stuff that we did in the mid 90s. I still have that raw inside at every show, honestly. I mean, that's just who I am. I think that the songwriting has matured. I've certainly been through a whole lot of shit over the years, some real triumphs, but some serious disappointments over the years too. And I think that life experience that's soaked in these new songs. The songs from when I was younger, I also went through sort of a bit of a tumultuous childhood, and that ended up in the early Mighty Purple songs. I wasn't always able to really put into words what it was that I was feeling. So a lot of the lyrics in the Mighty Purple stuff ended up being, a bit nebulous. Like, they could mean a lot to a lot of different people. And I think that still exists in my new stuff as well. The songwriting's become much more focused for me over the years. And also now I'm doing all the music, whereas before I had, my brother John and Adrian Vandegraff and David Keith, and before that Will Mix, all contributing their bunch of stuff into this melting pot of I don't even know what it was. When I was a young guy, I listened to stuff like Pearl Jam and Dave Matthews, and that was my sort of jam in the early 90s. Our bass player was really into bands like Sunny Day Real Estate and a bunch of Lou Barlow and Dinosaur Jr. He was really that kind of stuff. And then my brother was really into Jeff Buckley and the Police and all that sort of stuff. And then Dave Keith is just into a whole bunch of
Dave does it all, man. Dave does it all.
Then I think all of their influences sort of became part of me as well. Not that I sound anything like Lou Barlow or Dinosaur, but the angst I think that is in that music translates into the stuff that I write now. Not even that those things were necessarily influences for me, but because those sounds were being generated in Mighty Purple, they just became part of who I am.
It sounds like it's less of like I have these songs and they're gonna in this way go into the music. It's more or less like it's my DNA, right? I lived this many years of that and I went into it.
In Mighty Purple, I would bring like a raw verse chorus song, and then those guys would go
right.
Or John would bring in, something that was fairly formulated, that was always a bit challenging for me to learn. I was always like sort of the slowest one in the band, like, how do I do that thing? You know what I mean? And everybody else would, already have it.
Yeah, but look, I'll share. There were people that I played with in different groups that I was into, where the guitar player has zero formal education, and he'd struggle to get in on like, okay, we're going to compose this part, but the wrongness that they would bring to it sometimes is what made it unique, right? Or and that's the whole thing, right? I mean, we live in a subjective art that happens to have formal approaches and non-formal approaches, and the magic sometimes is in the mix of both of them, in my opinion. So you mentioned Dave Keith. I got to bring my man Dave Keith up, also as a drummer and equal inspiration. And again, it's the chemistry of Mighty Purple, right? What I specifically like about this record, and it's a trend I see on some of the records that I've played on, whether it be Bill Carlton or Dave Kane or any of those guys going back to the early 2000s, you almost have like your option to handpick a couple of different players for tunes, as you go through the tunes that may fit or may benefit a particular tune a different way. You mentioned that you gave one to Johnny. You said, go ahead and run with it. You gave one to a couple different people. You said, go ahead and run with it. When you're putting your album together and you're like, okay, I want the band to sound like this, is it more you have personal relationships with people, or do you hear certain people sounding a certain way on the songs that you wrote?
Well, there's a combination of that, but we were deep in the middle of the pandemic, and David Keith to me is like, he's like another blood brother, even though, our blood might be the same. I don't know.
Maybe that already happened. Yeah, right.
During the pandemic, he had built a soundproof room at his house and gotten a whole recording set up. And so I was basically using placeholder programmed drums in all of these songs to experiment and find who I was. It just was the obvious choice. Dave and I were talking a lot during the pandemic, and the songs really resonated with him. And so I would just send him the songs with the click track and send him the raw ones with, okay, here's the programmed drums, but I know you're going to do something totally more awesome than this. He would literally get it and send it back to me the next day and would just kill it there. Sometimes he'd send me two versions and he'd be like, well, here's the more spastic one, and here's the more reserved one. And a couple of times I definitely chose the reserved one, but
Right.
gotta gotta
You
showcase.
do that.
He since has moved to Nashville, and he also plays with Richie Blackmore's Night, which is a pretty incredible gig to get. And he's toured all over Europe and that sort of thing, and played with Rainbow, for heaven's sakes. He's like the baby in the band, though. He's like the young guy.
Oh yeah, it's great. Yeah.
It was really interesting to create a record and never be in the same room with anybody I was creating with, other than Seth, because Seth and I, our families are very close, and so he would come over, and he actually only did a couple of bass tracks on the record. I played the rest of the bass on the album, which I'm not really the best bass player in the world, but it got the job done for what needed to happen. And going forward, I'm really excited to use other players for different kinds of sound for the next record. I feel like this was painting 101 class for me as far as making a record, and
virtual recording. It's a whole, there's lots of room to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that said, the approach on this record was, this guy's like my brother from another mother. So, and he's got time and willing to do this. And, both of us were nearly completely out of work. And so I immersed myself in the music, and it was really nice to have the support from Dave from afar, also immersing himself in that. Yeah.
It's great to see too. Even, Seth and those guys, seeing them in different configurations of different bands, it's just also always just so joyous to see the pollination. And you hear it. Sometimes there's conscious chemistry that's happening. It's like, okay, I know where your pocket's at. I know that you sit slightly behind the beat, so we're going to play together here. And then sometimes it's like, we're not thinking about it, but it sounds awesome because we played together so many times.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just exciting for me. I have one question for you that is particularly resonant for me, because your song "Pray for Peace" literally has had an effect on my family. We've had a very rough year between deaths in the family and some other unfortunate events that we witnessed in the past year or so, and going through COVID. No, it's okay. It's part of life. But this particular song is something that the three of us very much bond over. And the message specifically hits us in the same way that like Imagine does, or Let It Be does. And I think there's a level of resonancy waiting to be achieved just amongst the people who have the privilege of hearing the song. I do think it's a message that the world needs to hear now, and specifically the line "Forgive like you've never been hurt." Right? We are in such desperate times right now that we're all feeling PTSD. We're feeling pain, just general existential pain. And it's hard to get excited about what's happening in the world. And a song like this, to me, is a reset. I'm riffing here a little bit, but all of this to say that, when you hear the stories of Uvalde or Newtown, and I have to think about my kid going into school and worrying about those kinds of things, and knowing that we have this song that like kind of bonds us together and we can listen to it, is not only comforting to her, but comforting to me, and does bring peace. So knowing that you had that message inside you and you're able to provide it on a level that at least resonated for me and my family.
Well, thank you.
If you had one wish for this song beyond just providing peace to people, like one tangible wish, what do you want this song to be for the world?
Well, I certainly want for lots of people to hear it, because I think it is a healing song. I wrote it actually pre-pandemic. I would say 3 months before the pandemic hit. And it was a song that I kept coming back to. It's actually not on the record. It was released as a single.
Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Yeah.
Oh, no, that's fine. It's pre-record. And actually recorded at Horizon Studios. And at the time I was reeling from still sort of like the pain and loss of like, my businesses that I built for years, but also, like you were saying, a lot of the school shootings, so much hate because of color of skin, so much hate because of who you worship and what you believe, who you are sexually, all the,
yeah.
And it just got me super discouraged one day that there's just so much hate. And I just sat down and started writing that. And I would love to share this song on a much larger level than, the sort of grassroots underground thing that I've been, sort of doing for a long time here. I was actually thinking about it the other day. It's funny that you bring up this song. I was like, it might be so cool to be able to like share this song on like a Good Morning America or something. Especially for people in our age bracket, no matter their creed, color, race, whatever, you know what I mean? I would just like a lot of people to hear it, and I would like it for it to be a healing song. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. I think it's profound, Steve. I think on this record, not only that song, right, which is a pre-album song, but on this record, I think you've outdone yourself and outdone yourself consistently, as you evolve. First of all, thank you for the record.
Thank you.
I think everyone deserves to be able to hear it. And thank you for your time, doing this interview today. It's great to catch up with you. So before we even jump to setting up the, how you can get the record and everything like that, the songs that are really like killing for me, I dig Muddy River, just the vibe and like those keyboard pads behind the like slight swing of the drums and the message. Honestly, it took me back to like, it reminded me a little bit of the same message or vibe of Black Muddy River by the Dead, which is like, we all come out of the dirt and we all go back into the dirt, right? We're all stardust eventually. And in a weird and sort of ironic twist in dealing with death over the past 6 to 12 months for me, and just thinking like, it's okay to know. Doesn't have to be like some story in your head about what's going to happen or what's not going to happen. I mean, like just on a purely scientific level, we go in and out of the dirt, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was amazing from a message level, but also the feel and the vibe of the tune. I noticed you're using some electronic drums in there. You were just really experimenting with song forms and that kind of stuff, and I really dug it. What are your favorite tunes on the new record?
I think I've gravitated most towards "Wish I Didn't Sway" is one of my favorite on the record. I do have an attachment to Muddy River because I wrote that after my grandfather had passed away a few years ago, and he was a very well-known writer in the New Age movement, from the late 60s. And then he was educator who taught in the sort of Waldorf school system.
Wow.
That name was Joseph Chilton Pierce. And he wrote a book called Crack in the Cosmic Egg. And, that book was kind of a part of like the hippie movement in a way. He passed away a few years ago, and one night I was sort of like, man, I really miss my granddad, and I want to know more about him. He was always a very mysterious character who would only talk about what he wanted to talk about. So there was never really any getting to know him deeply. So I went on YouTube and I just started looking up all these interviews and videos that people had interviewed him, like very similar to this kind of thing, or mostly live. I just started writing down some of the things that he was saying. And then I started putting them those things into my own words. And that's how Muddy River came about. A lot of the things he wrote about were super heady, just about our whole human existence. And so that's where that song came from. Most of the songs on the record were songs that popped out in 10 minutes, and then I ended up refining. I'd write a song at 7:00 at night and I'd be like, wait, it's 4 a.m. and I'm just finished recording.
I didn't know that it happened. Yeah.
Exactly. When you're enjoying something and time passes like this, when you hate something, it's like,
Yeah.
minutes. Yeah, come on, let me get out of here.
Yeah. So the album technically came out, was it last month?
The local release was in Connecticut. Basically, I wanted to celebrate with my friends, family, folks that come to listen to me a lot. And I just, I really wanted to get it out. I'd been planning on releasing it in May, but I signed on with a promotion company from Athens, Georgia, who basically is doing a whole press campaign right now. Wow. And the album actually officially comes out in digital format online nationally July 26th. So, leading up to that, we're hoping to get some press coverage and maybe some Northeast radio support. We'll see what comes down the pipe,
Do you have a preferred platform for folks to purchase it at? I'll share website addresses for you as well.
Comes out in July. I mean, it's going to be on all the places, the iTunes and the Bandcamps and all the things. Yep. But until that point, you can get hard copies from me.
Yes. Get hard copies from Steve, please.
Yeah. I mean, people can email through either my website, which is stephenpeterrodgers.com. I'm doing all my own mail orders right now, which is exciting. I do have, I had a whole bunch of orders in the second half of May there, which was great. Looking forward to selling more. It's available on vinyl and CD, and once it's available in digital format, there'll be a lot more opportunities for people to. Everybody listens digitally now,
Yep.
But strangely enough, I've sold a whole bunch of CDs. People still listen to CDs. I have a CD player in my car.
I can tell you, I will definitely be purchasing your album on vinyl. Just the people say, "Oh, it sounds so much better." Well, it's not really. I mean, you and I both know it's just a different set of frequencies that
Right.
pop a little bit better, maybe. But the warm fireplace crackle sound just means that you've got a couple scratches on the record, right?
Exactly.
But it's a vibe, and I'll definitely be purchasing on vinyl. So that's exciting.
I'm really stoked to play with you again, man. I think it's gonna be super fun. You and Dan and Nate, and then I'm bringing my up to luthiers. I'll be bringing my friend Colin Meyer to play guitar as well.
Oh, amazing. Yeah.
And then my friend Sean O'Reilly has been covering all the keyboard parts, and he's an amazing keyboard player and also plays 6-foot concert harp. We won't.
Wow. I was gonna say, you got a lift for that one.
I have to bring a whole nother van. Just
Yeah.
all gas money these days.
Right. I ran into Dan yesterday, and we were talking about working on the tunes, and he's equally excited, and we can't wait.
Wicked awesome, as they say up your way.
Wicked awesome. Yeah. So cool. Well, Steve, a pleasure. Like I said, can't wait to do this show. And is there anything else you wanna plug, or you want to get out there, or anything that I can do to shine the biggest floodlight possible on this record?
Oh, well, I think we covered a whole lot of bases, but I also build berry houses.
I love it.
All of that stuff, and I'm going to be it's the second edition of a national bestseller called Berry Homes and Gardens, which they're featuring like five or six of my berry house pieces, which is super excited. Super excited.
I love it. And I know you've been like doing the train thing for a long time. I remember the very first incarnation of the space, and some of those original train sets, and it's just so, again, going back to one of the first things I said is, you've always been Steve, right? There's never been compromise to sort of, you need me to write a pop song, I'll write a pop song, or it's always it's Steve. You're gonna get Steve 100% of the time, and that's. Oh,
I've tried to write them, but I'm just gonna stay me. That's the best way to be.
Right on. Well, cheers to you, my friend. It's a coffee cheers, but a cheers to you.
Cheers to you.
I look forward to getting together soon. Everybody go check out Steve's stuff, and check out the page coming up here. That's going to give you all the different links where you can go and check it out. Transcend broken boxes.